You know, people ask me all the time, what is my favorite doll's house? What is my favorite doll? That's impossible for me to answer. It's kind of like asking me which is my favorite child. I've said this before. But there was recently a little thing they did in Facebook, in one of the Facebook groups, asking if you had to run out of the house for a fire or whatever, and you could only grab one doll, which would it be? And I didn't have to think too long for my answer, and that would be this doll here. There are many reasons. First of all, there is something about that face, that eerily beautiful, sort of sad face, that just captivates me. The second thing is the story of how I came to learn her past and her history. Again, another history lesson. This doll, similar to Mariana, I was the very first owner outside the ancestral family since 1721. This doll is circa 1721. She did pass through no less than 3 dealers very quickly before she came to me. But I'm the first actual permanent owner collector to own her since the original ancestral family. Now, she's also very, very special, not only because she's so early, not only because she's so beautiful, not only because she's, again, all original, and there is one exception to that. In this, we did repair some of her fingers. Very, very frequently, these little delicate fingers would break. And I couldn't decide back and forth, but so many of them were broken, and I just made the decision to do it, and I don't feel bad about that, because now she has pretty hands that can hold all her lovely things. But you see this nose rub? I love a nose rub. Very, very frequently, these early English wooden dolls have nose rubs, and I just can't stand when people touch that up with paint. To me, that's her essence, that's her character, and I can envision a little girl rubbing her own nose against that nose and loving this doll so, and that's how she got the nose rub. The former doll I talked about, Mariana, was almost unplayed with. This doll clearly was loved and played with. So that makes her very special. But the most magnificent part of this doll is her original trousseau. Look at this trousseau. Now, I have added bits here and there, but the clothing for the most part is all her original clothing, including something I have never seen before in an early English wooden doll, her original chocolate woolen riding habit. This is made out of wool, so yes, it's a little bit moth or bug-eaten, but wool is a strong, sturdy fabric, similar to cotton, and silk was the worst, but original riding habit. Who has ever seen that in an early English wooden doll? I certainly haven't. So from the minute that I acquired this doll, I was really, really eager to know who had owned her. Now, she did come with significant provenance. She came out of a house called Puzzlage House in England. And Puzzlage is located outside the village of Upton in the Yelm Valley, near to Plymouth in Devon County in England. And so I knew the name of the house. And I learned through subsequent dealings, which I'll explain in a minute, that knowing the name of the house is so valuable. Knowing the name of the person that owned a doll or the family name is good, but not nearly as good as knowing the name of the house, and I'll tell you why. So I knew she came from Puzzlage House. That's basically all I knew. I researched Puzzlage House on the internet, and I found out that Puzzlage was first recorded in the year 1280. It was owned originally by someone named Newton Ferrers. It passed through many generations through marriage to the family called Upton from Cornwall. And then it fell into the hands of a man named James Young, who was a prominent Plymouth physician and merchant, again through marriage. He married a woman named Mary Upton in 1718, and he built the current Puzzlage House in 1720. So I learned all about Puzzlage House, and I learned about the owner of Puzzlage House, a man named James Young. But I needed to find out, I was desperate to find out who his family was, who his children were, what little girl had owned this beautiful doll. I often name my dolls after their owners, and so I wanted a name for her. And so I looked through the internet. I looked through, there's a great resource called the National Archives of England that has all kinds of deeds and trusts and land deals and marriage licenses and things like that. And I searched and I searched and I searched, and I found out it was very, very frustrating indeed. First of all, surnames or last names were very common names that many, many different people had. Young turned out to be almost like Jones or Smith. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. To make matters even more challenging, sometimes families, different generations, would change the spelling. So even though this James Young spelled his last name or surname Y-O-N-G-E, there were also some without the E. I've been recently trying to research a family by the name of Ward, and sometimes it's W-A-R-D, and sometimes it's W-A-R-D-E. So it makes it even more confusing. In addition to the last name or surname being very common, and many people having the same one, the first name is even worse. James. It was very common for a father to name his son James, that son to name his son James. James. Lifespans were very erratic. Sometimes they were longer, sometimes they were very short. There could be many James within the same generation, and you didn't know who you had. What I did find out was that it was not common to name a child a name, such as James, and then to name an additional child in that family the same name, unless the first James had died. So that was typically the tradition. There would only be at least one child. That was at least a bit of a help. I searched, and I thought I'd come across the right James Young. He was a physician, and he lived in Plymouth, and his name was spelled the right way, or at least the way I thought it should be. And I thought I had the right one. And what was really cool about him was that he had a very colorful life. He was a physician aboard a British battleship, the Warwick, that was attacked by pirates. And he had such a colorful life, he actually wrote a book about it, a journal. So thanks to the wonders of the internet, I managed to find a copy of this long since out of print book. And I ordered it, and I breathlessly waited for it to arrive because I thought for sure there would be mention of his family and children in this book. When I got it, I was terribly disappointed because there was no mention whatsoever of anything like that. And it was really clear to me, just the dates didn't line up. It was clear that I didn't have the right James Young. So I had to start again. And this time I wanted to go to the source. I wanted to go to England and dig and delve and go to the records offices and try to find my family that way. The internet is wonderful, and it has since gotten even better. This was quite some time ago. There's Ancestry.com and all these things, but at that time I needed to go physically do this in person, and I was excited to do that. So the very next time we were in England, I made arrangements. A very, very close friend of mine who loved to go on these sleuthing adventures with me. I called her the Watson to my Holmes, as in Sherlock Holmes. She was just as passionate as I was, and it was so much fun to have a partner in crime going on these expeditions. And we decided to go together down to Devon, and I learned that most of the records of Puzzlage House were held at a place called the Plymouth and Devon Records Office, and Plymouth and West Devon Records Office, I think it was called. And so I was so excited to go there. And then my friend, my partner in crime, had managed to connect with the family that was living in Puzzlage House. Now, Puzzlage House at that point was still owned by the original ancestral owners, but they weren't living in it. They were living in a farm nearby. I really wanted to meet them, and we tried really hard. That's another story, but that never happened. But my friend had managed to connect to the family that was renting Puzzlage House at the time, and they agreed to let us come for a visit. So we had this great plan of going to the records office, searching for my names of my family, and then going to visit the actual house where the doll had come from. The day was completely full of mishaps. I woke up that morning and to find that my trusty 35mm camera, essential for documenting and researching, had broken. And it wasn't a battery issue, it was just broken. So I was like, oh no, what do I do? And I had my two daughters with me who were quite young at the time. We ran out and we went to our trusty taxi stand, and there was a queue or a line of 24 people in this waiting for taxis. So forget that. And so then we went down a few more blocks, tried to hail down a taxi. I'm usually really good at it. No taxis anywhere in sight. This was important because we had planned to rendezvous with my friend at a mutually convenient train station, and the timing was critical. So I grabbed the girls and we ran to the tube or the subway station, and like 2 or 3 trains later, we were at Paddington Station, and we jumped on the train, and we, managed to rendezvous with our friend at the mutually convenient train station on the platform. She hopped into the train, and off we were. So 3.5 hours later, that's how long the train took, we arrived in Plymouth, and my first course of business was to try to get my camera fixed. So we asked the taxi driver if he knew of a camera shop, and he very obligingly took us to a camera shop that was relatively close by. And everyone else waited in the car. I ran to the camera shop and said, please, can you fix this? And they took a look and they said, yes, but it's going to take at least 2 weeks. So I was like, so I had to rely. I had a much smaller, way inferior little pocket camera that I had as a backup. So I had to rely on that. In those days, we did not have cell phones that had cameras in them. Look how far we've come. I mean, if I'd had a cell phone that had a camera in it, then I would have been golden, no problem at all. But anyway, so hop back into the cab, and then we were off to the records office. I had envisioned this beautiful brick building in a bucolic country lane. No way. It was this horribly ugly industrial building in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing around it anywhere. It was really, really disappointing. But anyway, we go on in, taxi leaves, we're in the middle of nowhere, and I see this room crowded full of people at tables. And I go to the receptionist and I say, I'm here to do some research, to which she replies, do you have an appointment? Well, my heart sank. I didn't have an appointment. I didn't know you needed an appointment. She said, I'm really sorry, but we're very full and there's just no room. I'm sorry. And then I pleaded with her. I said, please, I've come all the way from America. We came today from London. This is our one time I can do this. Please, can't you make room for me? And she agreed very kindly. I was so relieved, but only for me. She said, I have space for you and nobody else. So then what do they do? We're in the middle of nowhere. So my lovely, lovely, sweet friend very sweetly says, I'll take the girls, do your research. Don't worry about it. And I have no idea where they went. But anyway, they left. So then I sat down and I was in a big rush now to get things done because we didn't want to be late. We didn't want to be late for our visit to this woman's house who had invited us to the Puzzlage House. I mean, after all, we were total strangers. She never even met us, and we certainly couldn't be late. The receptionist, I told her that I was researching Puzzlage House, and she very, very obligingly and thankfully brought out this huge book. Huge. It was like a scrapbook. It was like an album. And on the cover it said History of Puzzlage, spelled P-O-S-E-Y-E-L-U-I-N-C-H-E. This long, archaic spelling of Puzzlage, which is now spelled P-U-S-L-I-N-C-H. And in it was stuffed, just generation after generation after generation had contributed to this album. There were family trees, there were marriage licenses, there were land deeds and titles, everything back to the 1200s when the land was first recorded. It was a massive amount of information, and I searched and I searched and I searched, and I was really so eager and anxious to find out information on my family, the family of James Young. And I did find some marriage licenses. I confirmed that he married Mary Upton in 1718. I found the land deeds for Puzzlage, which were handed over to him when he married Mary, etc., but no mention of his children. Another thing I found out, which is kind of sad, is that at least in those days, family trees often only included the names of the male lineage. The only times they included the names of females was when a female had married into the family. They often would only list the male children and not the female children. So that was also a big roadblock. And I looked and I looked and I did whatever I could, and she brought me more books, etc. And I finally had no choice but to give up, because we had to get on to this visit at Puzzlage House, and I also had no idea what my friend was doing with my 2 little girls all this time. So I picked up this big heavy book and I started to take it back to the receptionist to give it back. And when I noticed out of the corner of an eye this little piece sticking out of one corner of the album that I hadn't noticed before, it had suddenly just magically appeared. And I pulled it out, and that was my prize. It was a piece of vellum, and on the vellum was listed in old brown ink the names of all the young children. On the top it said James and Mary Young were married 1718, and then it listed their children. And that was my prize. And here is a photograph of that list that I took with my little tiny inferior camera. I did a pretty good job. James Young and Mary Upton were married September 28th, 1718. 12 children. First a boy, James, again, named the son James, and then John, and their first daughter, Mary. Which wasn't a surprise because, again, oftentimes girls were named after their mothers, but this was a confirmation. They didn't always do that. So her name was Mary, the child was Mary. And then there was Elizabeth. Oh, and it also said, Mary, November 11th, 1721, Saturday afternoon. None of the other children have that written. So she was very special indeed, the first girl. I knew that this list had to have been written by the mother herself or a close friend or relation. And on the back of the list, actually, I saw was written the name of her sister, Mary's sister. So it was an aunt, this Mary's sister, Mary Upton's sister, who wrote this list, very lovingly so. So after Mary was Elizabeth, and then we have Jenny, and then we have, who do we have? William, Charles, George, Henry, Samuel, and then who do we have? Another Mary, who was born on May 1st, 1732. So that told me that this Mary had died. And then they named another little girl Mary. And that made me very, very, very sad indeed. But all these little girls had played with her, and the first girl was Mary. So I named my doll Mary. So now that I've told you that story, let's have fun looking at Mary and all her wonderful things. Here we have, she's dressed right now in her, I call it cotton day dress. And again, cotton survived much better than silk. It's actually very strong and the colors are very vibrant considering they're 300 years old, literally. So this is her cotton day dress. She has a lovely blouse. She has a pair of pockets underneath and a lovely quilted skirt. I have gifted her this purse. This is a miniature antique purse. It's 18th century, and it's made with silver and fabric by the Dutch silversmith Jan Banket. And she has her original pink stockings. They were literally filled with holes. They were so holey, they wouldn't even stay up. Even with garters, if I had added garters, which they usually wore, they were just a disaster. So I bought some antique or vintage wool, rose-colored thread, and I just made enough stitches. A friend of mine helped me with this, enough stitches to keep the stockings up. You just want to do the minimal that you need to do. She has her original little shoes with, again, the little pointed, curled up toes, just like Mariana's shoes were. But this doll is about a quarter of a century earlier than Mariana. And then again, the woolen riding habit, 2 pieces, the jacket and the skirt. She has boots, a hat. She has a lovely cotton night dress, another printed skirt, a lovely shawl, several other undergarments, a shift, and another petticoat. This is not her corset. This is something I'm just showing because I think it's so interesting. This is boned, and it has this very interesting thing here. This is an iron needle for lacing, easing in the lacing of the corset. I thought that was kind of cool. I wanted to share that with you, but that wasn't hers originally. Here's a stomacher, and we're going to talk about stomachers a little bit later. She's got lots of hats. This is called a mob cap. That's one of her hats. She has extra blouses. She has this beautiful hand-embroidered petticoat or skirt. I guess it probably would have been considered a petticoat, I think. Yes, it was a petticoat. I remember, yes, it was. She had it underneath. So in this case, instead of having to lift the skirt over and over again, I've decided to display all the pieces separately for the most part so that you can see them. So that's that. And then this wonderful, this is a very similar hoop skirt to Mariana, although Mariana's has the panier on the side. But this is a beautiful boned hooped petticoat. And a beautiful silk, not in very good condition, as you can see, as I've said over and over again. Silk is the first thing to go. Skirt and a little shawl. The shawl is actually reversible. It could be worn either way, but I like it like that. Now, she didn't come with any of these accessories. I added all of that, and the furniture. I added all of that. Here we have a miniature teacup and saucer. This is made by a company called Cawley. They were from Shropshire in England, and they made full size as well as miniature porcelain and china in the 18th century. This has the theme is Asian. That was very, very much in vogue at the time. The Orient, as it was known, was considered very exotic. So patterns that had an Oriental theme were very, very desired. Her ink pot has a quill, a feather, that I found at the harbor in Plymouth when I was there on the visit. You may remember I have lots of little bits of nature in all of my dolls' houses, feathers and pine cones and leaves and things like that. And they bring me back to the time. So I remember sitting at Plymouth Harbor with my friend and the girls having fish and chips that evening after this was all over. And I saw this feather, and I took it and I saved it. I did the same with this little dried flower. These I found at Puzzlage House later that afternoon when we went to visit. Here you have a little seal with the letter M for Mary. This is the powder that they used to shake on top of the ink to help it dry. These spoons are very, very special. These are sterling silver 18th century doll spoons. They are not salt spoons. Now, I have salt spoons with lots of my dolls and dolls' houses. They make wonderful miniature spoons, but they're salt spoons. These are actual miniature spoons. And this one even has her name on it. Can you see? Mary. Anytime I find something with the name Mary, I buy it. This says Mary. This is, of course, much later than the doll. And this little tape measure, Mary. And then this is a vinaigrette. And this says Mary, too. I talked about vinaigrettes in one of my doll's house presentations. A rag dipped in vinegar would be placed inside, and then these little holes would allow the scent to come out. I actually don't like the scent of vinegar very much, but I'm sure it was better than other scents that they had to bear in those days, especially walking around the streets with the open sewage and the horse manure and everything else, chamber pots being dumped out. So this is her little personal vinaigrette. So this might have been kept in her pocket. We have some sugar tongs and a little ancient almanac. Here is a picture of Puzzlage House. This is Puzzlage House. I miniaturized it and put it in an old frame for her so she can remember where she came from. Sewing roll. I like to put all kinds of things that weren't meant for dolls with dolls. I mean, it's small and it's lovely. Actually, this is a purse. It's not a sewing roll, it's a purse. But it's 18th century, has that beautiful embroidery. It goes well with her colors. Oh, and here, this is a penny. This is a Charles II era penny. It's circa 1770, it's dated 1678. And this is a real size person's penny. But see how tiny they were? I mean, they're so much smaller than our pennies today. Not that we even use pennies much anymore, but this is a real size person's penny. But another sub collection of mine is I look for antique coins that are tiny that I can put with my dolls. And I think that's small enough to put with a doll. But look at these. These are 5th and 6th century BC Roman coins. And if you look close, you can see the detail on them. So look how tiny that one is. And then you get even tinier. And then, look at this one. Look at that. I mean, and you can see the little detail engraved. I mean, this is the size of, I don't know, the head of a pin, basically. The fact that this didn't get lost, the fact that it's still here. And then that's a whole nother world, antique coins. I mean, I don't even know how to date them. I don't know anything about them, but I love to find them, and I put them with my dolls. I'm so afraid I'm going to lose this, because, I mean, gosh, it hasn't been lost for, 5th or 6th century BC. Wouldn't that be horrible if I lost it after all these thousands and thousands of years? And then we've got shoes. She has wonderful shoes. And these actually are not original to her, but I added them because they were so fabulous. So these are called patens. And these were very, very important. So you'd slip your own shoes right into these and wear them on top of your own shoes. They had beautiful silk and kid slippers then. They were very lovely. And the streets were mud. They were dirt and mud and filth and horrible stuff, and they didn't want to ruin their beautiful little silken kid slippers. They also didn't want to dirty the hems of their long dresses. So they would slip their shoes right into these, and then this would elevate them many inches above the ground. So these are Mary's patens that I've gifted her. But I have some other patens here I wanted to share with you. This is a pair of little tiny patens that I have in a dollhouse. And see how small they are? They're only about 1.5 inches. And these are the most special of all, because these patens have the original shoes that go with them. So you can see, this is the paten, typically made of wood, a heel to give it a lift off the ground, and the shoes would sit right inside. And look at how perfectly those fit. I mean, I've never seen anything like that before, patens with shoes. I'm so excited to find those. And, I forgot to mention, this is a piece of Venetian lace that she could use as a shawl or for whatever, and it's circa 1720, so just the year that she was born. I gifted Mary also this little fan. It's a little small for her size, but it's sweet. It looks good in her lap. And I wanted to talk about fans. So, over here, I have a selection of doll fans and other things that we'll get to. And these, I love fans, and many of my dolls are holding fans, and they're all different sizes. This is probably the finest. This is French, all hand painted on both sides. And that's a lovely fan. And then the others are also very sweet with either ivory or bone and hand painted. And this one's especially unusual because it has this interesting handle. It has this interesting handle, and I don't know if that was used to just put on the lady's wrist or what, but I've never seen one with a handle like that. And it was nice because just a few days ago, I received this from a friend, and she didn't even know I was doing this presentation. And it's called The Language of the Fan. So I'm going to read it to you because, again, this is a history lesson in an object. The 18th century was the heyday of the fan. It was an essential accessory in a stuffy, crowded ballroom. However, no matter how fashionable your fan, you would not be considered elegant unless you held it in the correct way. 18th century women used the fan for more than keeping cool. They used it as a form of expression. More than any other article of fashion, the fan became part of a lady's body language. There even existed a language of the fan, whereby women could send messages across the room without saying a word. To use this language, it was essential to know your right from your left. So here are some examples. This is too small for me, but touching your right cheek meant yes. Touching your left cheek, no. Twirling in left hand, we are watched. Twirling in right hand, I love another. Fanning slowly, I am married. Fanning quickly, I am engaged. Open and shut, you are cruel. Open wide, wait for me. Presented shut, do you love me? With handle to lip, kiss me. In right hand in front of face, follow me, drawing across the cheek, I love you, and placing on left ear, I wish to get rid of you. So I learned something very new myself recently. Here's one of Mary's stomachers. I'm going to put this down. This would be worn over the corset and attached to the dress with pins. And this doesn't really go with her cotton day dress, but that's what a stomacher looked like. It was just a simple triangular shaped piece of cloth. And over here we have other stomachers. So this is a real size person's stomacher. It's beautifully embroidered. It's wonderful. It looks very small, but remember, people in those days were much smaller than we are today. This one is also a real person's stomacher. It's amazingly elaborate with all that gorgeous gilded work. This one's a little bit larger, or considerably larger than that one, I'd say. And then we have some doll stomachers. This would have been for a much larger doll than Mary. But so cool that that survived and that we have it today to look at. And this doll stomacher, you can zoom in on that, is really magnificent. Very, very special. Can't imagine what doll that would have been on. Pockets are a whole nother history lesson. And just 2 days ago, I received this book. I didn't even know this book existed. You can see I love books, and books are essential for learning and reading and researching, and they're just so fun to learn about all these wonderful things in books. And this is a whole book called The Pocket. The whole book is about pockets. And I've barely had the chance to read any of this, but I'm just going to read you a couple little tidbits from the back. Pencils, a sketchbook, cake, yards of stolen ribbon, thimbles, money, keys, snuff boxes, a picture of a lover, 2 live ducks. Women and girls carried a startling array of things in their capacious tie-on pockets, a commonplace accessory of dress throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. But tie-on pockets were far from trivial or marginal things, worn under the skirt by duchesses and country gentry, prostitutes and washerwomen alike. In practice, they enabled women to negotiate their relationship to consumption, to work, possessions, mobility, and privacy. Used as a lens to explore the complexities of women's lives, tie-on pockets reveal unsuspected facets of the past, bringing women's stories into intimate focus. So I can't wait to read this book. This has got my name on it. This is all about learning history through an object, right? So here we have some examples of pockets. These are regular sized person pockets. This one is very sturdy and a very strong cotton. And again, it'd be tied on at the waist. And this one is beautifully embroidered. Not nearly as elaborate as my Mariana's pocket, but very nice just the same. This one is much simpler. I shared this one in a previous presentation. This is made out of silk. Again, clearly remnants. Maybe this from the same dress. Maybe the dress that they made when they made this pocket was made out of this fabric, and then they just used the remnants to adorn the pocket. Dolls' pockets are very rare and special, and they're usually very, very simple. I have many pockets that are just this plain white. And here we've got a little hanky sticking out. That was one of the most common things held in a pocket. This one has lovely white work. It's not white anymore, but it's a white work pocket, so getting a little bit more fancy. And then this one, similar to this, has lovely embroidery for a larger doll. This one is very simple, but what's special about this one is it has a matching huswife. This is called a huswife. Huswife means housewife, and this would be used to keep all sorts of things that the lady needed, particularly sewing items. So maybe little scissors, maybe needles were threaded through here. This one actually has initials on it. It might have had thimbles. It might have had any manner of things. And it was often rolled up and put in the pocket. Sometimes when the lady was working with those items, she would instead tie it around her waist. So that's called a huswife. So there we have some pockets. And one of the last things I wanted to show you was a little trick that I want to share. So I wanted to display all of Mary's hats. And as you can see, I have them on these hat stands that are quite large, but they're the perfect size for her hats. And hat stands are hard to find. You can find small ones, but even those are the really nice ones are quite difficult to find in antique hat stands, old ones. So, and I've never seen hat stands for this size hat. So what did I do? I came up with this way to make them. So you can very easily, at any craft store such as Michael's, they sell these unfinished candlesticks. And then they're very nice and solid, and they're unfinished, but they're good quality. And then they sell all different sizes of these 100% solid balls. And you just glue the ball on top of the candlestick, and there you go. Voila, headstand. And you can see I have this size, you could do this size, you could do even smaller, and they have all sizes. And these ones I left unfinished, or actually I think I varnished these. I did varnish those. But you can also paint them or you can stain them. Here's an example of one that I stained. So see, it's just makes a perfect hat stand, right? And these dress forms are not difficult to find. I think these are for this size for American Girl dolls, which of course are much fatter than my Mary and her clothes. So you have to do some pins. Again, pins are very key. I had to use pins, and always use the very, very fine, extra sharp pins. That's very important, especially when you're sticking it through silk or even the cotton. You want to use the very, very fine, extra sharp pins, and then they'll glide in and out without damaging the fabric. So I've had to do some pinning, but they work. You know, like I wanted them all matching. It's very hard to find antique dress forms, and maybe you'll find one, and it'll cost like, you know, a fortune for one. And so this is a nice way to have that. So I just wanted to. Oh, here, I forgot to show you this. This is a trade card. I'm very interested in trade cards. I'm hoping that through trade cards I might be able to find out more information about early English wooden dolls who made them. But this shows you the importance of pockets, as the other one showed you the importance of pins. Haberdasher at the Three Pigeons in Long Acre near Drury Lane, London. Sells all sorts of threads, ankle tapes, tapes, boot strappings, quality bindings, blah, 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 etc., etc. And here we have that he also sells silken pockets. So there we go. So I'll conclude by telling you a little bit about Puzzlage House and when I got to go inside this wonderful house, the place where my Mary, the girl, as well as my doll began. So this is a picture that I took of Puzzlage House when we were there. Those are my two little girls playing. And it was such a lovely visit. It was a beautiful day, and the woman, her name was Catherine. She was the wife of the family that was renting the house. They had several young children, I think 2 little girls and a baby boy. And the minute that my daughters arrived, they just rambled off with the little girls to play. And we had a lovely, lovely visit in the garden. And we showed her pictures of the doll. She was very interested in the history of the house, so that's why she had granted us the visit, because she was very excited to see pictures of the doll. We made her beautiful copies of photos of the doll, and we had this wonderful visit. And then she took us through the house, and that was so amazing for me to be in the actual space where Mary had lived all these years. She had never been taken out of that house. So I knew that the doll had the nickname from the first ancestral children, the shepherdess. The doll was nicknamed the shepherdess. And I was like, why? Why was she named the shepherdess? Well, surrounding Puzzlage House are beautiful green rolling hills dotted with sheep. So that's where she got the name shepherdess. Then we went to all through the whole house. Catherine was wonderful. She took us through every single room. By the back door was the original gun rack. She had her children's galoshes piled on it, but it was the original gun rack. And Catherine said to me, I heard there used to be loads and loads of deer in the deer parks around here. That's why the riding habit. There was the original gun rack where they held their guns for hunting. Surely the mother and perhaps the daughters rode themselves, and so they fashioned their doll Mary her own riding habit. And then the one most special thing was when we went up to the very top floor where Catherine was sure the nursery had been located. And there I saw sitting on the floor right by the fireplace, my own little youngest daughter, who at the time was 5, and she had her doll with her. She had a doll she carried with her everywhere at that age. And she was playing with her doll right there in the nursery, likely where Mary, the girl Mary, had played with the doll Mary. And it just came full circle. I ended up doing a subsequent visit a year later to the same records office. I wanted to confirm that the first Mary had died, and the same receptionist was there, and she was very, very kind, and she actually showed me how to research the death records on the internet. And I'll never forget when it came up on the screen and I saw, Mary Young, and that she had died, and she was so young, she was only 7. And I actually started to cry. And I'm sure that everyone in that records office thought that it was my own ancestor. And of course it wasn't, but that's how close I had finally then felt about her. And then I also saw that the second Mary had died the very year of her birth, 1732. So both of the little girl Marys had died, and all that remained was this Mary. If you liked what you just saw and heard, and you're interested in reading about it a little bit more, that I did write articles about each of these dolls, and you can, if you don't already have them, find the copies of the issues. Prince Charlie, I wrote about in Doll News in summer of 2016. And Mariana, I wrote about also in Doll News winter of 2015. And then finally Mary, summer of 2011. So hope you enjoyed it and hope you learned something, and thanks so much. Bye.